Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. I do appreciate the opportunity. People have asked me already tonight if I like doing this, and I do like doing this because I really feel like it's an educational opportunity for me. Let me tell you how the night will unfold. In a moment, we're going to have opening statements from all three of our candidates, and then we'll get right into questions. You see the microphone in the center aisle there? That's going to be open for you to be able to use if you have questions. And I really, from past experience, we do welcome and expect this group to provide a lot of questions. And so please prepare those and be ready to go in just a few moments. The Board of Realtors also has some questions that they have provided for tonight. So I will be using those also and respecting the time that they took to come up with their questions. As you see right now, we do not have Ian Thomas at the front table. He is the candidate for 4th Ward City Council. He's running for re-election. He's running unopposed, like Carl Scala also is unopposed in his ward. Ian Thomas sent us a message earlier today saying that he is ill, so he is not able to be here. I'm going to read a statement that he did provide, and this is from Ian Thomas, and he said to us, "I am grateful to the Columbia Board of Realtors for hosting this forum and to 4th Ward residents for the support I have received over the last 6 years. Although I am unopposed in my re-election effort, I intend to spend the next few months visiting 4th Ward neighborhoods, listening to residents' concerns and priorities, and incorporating that input into my policy platform. Planning for growth and incorporating equity into all of our policies are the most pressing issues I see for the City of Columbia right now. Unlike equality, the concept of equity recognizes historical injustices and other factors that have perpetuated severe disparities in economic opportunity, in neighborhood safety, in health status, etc., and strives to correct them so that Columbia is a place where all families can thrive. My specific strategies include improving public transport, expanding affordable housing, and implementing community policing. With regard to growth, I am working hard to rein in the taxpayer subsidies, tens of millions of dollars per year, that pay for expanded infrastructure, and to incorporate smart growth principles into our zoning code. All of these policy changes must be debated and decided with full government transparency, and I commit to continuing to be fully responsive and accessible to voters through my website, monthly newsletter, and constituent conversation at Dunn Brothers Coffee." That's a statement from Ian Thomas, who is not able to be with us tonight. The candidates who are here have a 2-minute opening statement. We have gone technical and technology and a digital countdown, so this is really good. On the front, they'll know exactly how much time they have. We'll have 2-minute opening statements. We're going to move from closest to me to furthest from me for the opening statements, and then we'll get into question and answers. When we get to the question and answer time, they'll have 90 seconds to answer the initial question, and then should we want to follow up, and this means you, when you ask a question also, if you'd like to follow up, they could have a 60-second response on the follow-up, and then another 30 seconds for rebuttal. So that's what the plan is tonight. Ought to be able to go back and forth a bit deeper, and we plan on ending no later than 7. That's our cutoff time. We'll see how it goes, and we'll start right now.
Pardon me.
Yes?
How about Pledge of Allegiance at this meeting?
I'm not running this. Anybody have an objection to that?
I know.
All right, well, let's stand and we'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance then.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Much like a city council meeting. Mayor Brian Treese, you're up first, and we'll give you 2 minutes for an opening statement.
Just like a city council meeting, except with time limits. Well, thank you, David, and thank you to the Board of Realtors for hosting tonight's forum. My name is Brian Treese, and it has been an honor to serve as your mayor for the last 3 years. You know, in the last 3 years, we've added over 1,000 new jobs. We've strengthened and protected our neighborhoods, and we have restored confidence in a government that is open, honest, and transparent. But there's still more work to do. And now more than ever, we need steady leadership to continue the progress we've made. I am so proud of what we have accomplished in the last 3 years. First, I initiated a transparency policy that the council adopted unanimously, and we've launched new online tools. I was talking to Steve Strawn about that, how you can access now public records online and financial data that shows you where the city spends every dollar. I fought for the first comprehensive zoning reform in over 40 years to better protect our neighborhoods. And we added 3 new police officers and 2 new fire stations without raising taxes. In fact, I led the effort to defeat a property tax without a public vote, and I want to thank the realtors for joining me in supporting me in that effort and defeating that tax increase. I voted to hold the line on all tax and fee increases like utility rates, water rates, electric rates without a monthly financial report. And I voted against every taxpayer giveaway to wealthy special interests. And together, we called for a state performance audit of the city because it's our responsibility to make Columbia more efficient. And recently, the City Council came together to implement badly needed changes at City Hall. You know, since I was elected mayor in April of 2016, we've added over 1,076 new jobs that have been recruited or retained here in Columbia's economy with a capital investment of over $326 million. These are high-wage, career-supporting, family-supporting jobs at Dana Corp, Aurora Dairy, Kraft, and the first nuclear regulatory-approved Northwest Medical Isotopes facility, the first of its kind since 1985. And that was just my first 3 years. You know, Columbia is the crown jewel of cities in the state of Missouri, and I'm running to keep it that way. Thank you.
All right, now Carl Scala, current council member, your opening statement, please.
Yes, I'm actually looking forward to getting to the questions session, but I thought by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know, I've been around for a while, since the turn of the century, actually, in this town. But let me make just a few remarks. I'm a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, current Columbia Mayor Pro Tem, current 3-term Third Ward City Councilman. I hold experimental psychology degrees from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and the University of Missouri-Columbia, where I retired from cross-disciplinary behavioral and biomedical research as director of the Swine Hormone Research Corps in the Department of Biomedical Sciences School of Veterinary Medicine. I've served on several panels for the National League of Cities and Smart Growth America, and I'm the recipient of 6 National League of Cities Leadership Excellence Awards. In the past, chair of the Columbia-Boone County Environment and Energy Commission and past vice chair of the Columbia Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm also the past president of the Boone County Mule Skinners Club, the past president of Boone County Smart Growth Coalition, and a longstanding member of Columbia's Chamber of Commerce and its Government Affairs Committee. My community service includes board membership of New Wave Radio Corporation, KOPN 89.5 FM, and I am the weekly Thursday morning host of KOPN's morning air program, Music from the Classical Genre. I will get to some of the issues and the voting record when it comes to concluding comments. Meanwhile, I'm looking forward to the questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scala. Chris Kelly, your opening comments, please.
Hello, Realtors, and thank you for having me, and thank you, David. My name's Chris Kelly. I've been a public official in this community for pushing 40 years. I'm not right now, but I was your state representative for 18 years. I was judge and county clerk. And during that time, I worked tirelessly on the economy and this quality of life in this community. Helping with the IBM project, being intimately involved in bringing Missouri Employers Mutual Insurance Company to Columbia. I'm very proud of those 2 things. This is a wonderful community. Its employment, its quality of life, the professionalism, the competence of government. And those things have been true for generations. They're not the product of any single me or anyone, any single individual. To accomplish together fails. And my entire career demonstrates that I am able to bring disparate groups together. I will resist special interest, and I will fight to maintain the strong, classic, middle-class center of both our philosophy and our politics and our way of life. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We're going to get to questions right now. Let me begin with a couple of questions from the Board of Realtors, and this is one that I know people were talking about even before we started tonight. And again, when we start the questions, you'll have 90 seconds to answer. If there's a follow-up of any kind, then we'll give you another 60 seconds. If you choose, you would like to have a response to anything that is said by any of the other persons at the front table, we'll give you 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Rudy Keller wrote recently in the Tribune in his column about, he says it's time to start thinking about enlarging the Columbia City Council. So the question is in regard to that, and I want to start with the current councilman, and that's Carl Scala. Does the city council need to be increased to better represent the citizens of Columbia? And that's yes or no, but your fuller answer to whether there should be a larger council or not.
Well, that yes or no question depends upon the public and what the discussion is when it comes to the possibility of enlarging the council. I mean, there are arguments on both sides of that issue. I suspect the best time to deal with that is going to be in the year following the census, which is 2021. That's when we talk about redistricting. That's when lots of the new lines are drawn, the balance between populations of the wards and so on and so forth. It's also a propitious time to deal with some of the charter amendments. This one has a potential for being a charter amendment, whether we want to increase it or not. There's a question of whether you want or not you want at-large appointments or just ward appointments. There are other questions that have arisen that we may want to deal with in this community discussion with regards to whether or not the mayor ought to have a 4-year term or a 2-year term, but probably a 4-year term so that it gets off dead center, so that it's not this competition between the 3rd and 4th ward. A good friend of mine, in fact, lost the mayor's race, Jerry Wade, and he lost his seat as well on the city council because we don't sequence these kinds of things. So I think there's lots of discussion to be had. I'm looking forward to the community discussion. If it occurs before that census, so be it. But it's going to inform my opinion as to where we go with respect to what the public has to say.
I think on this one I'm going to get an answer from everybody and then maybe come back for a follow-up. Chris Kelly, your thought about enlarging the council?
Carl's precisely correct that the census time is a factor. I think I disagree with him a little bit on the timing of the consideration for the matter. I think we should resolve whatever we're going to do prior to the census, so if there's new districts, they can be drafted consistent with the new number of council people. There's 3 ways you could do it if you wanted to do it, and I'm going to come back to whether you want to do it or not in a minute. One is you could just make more wards, go from 6 to 8 wards. The advantage of that is you tend to get people who are more interested in articulating the concerns of a particular area. The disadvantages is in a smaller district, you're less likely to get people who are going to look at the overall interest of the whole city. Both of those are real values. There's a couple other ways you could do it. One, you could have multi-member districts, 2 from each ward. And I'm not saying you should do that. What you do if you get that is you tend to get more variety of philosophical opinion. And third, you could have, as Carl says, at-large seats. The other question he brings up is real important, and that is, should we change the term? All of these things, the fundamental basic question is it broke? And if it's not broke, you shouldn't fix it. And so those are probably, because the new system's probably going to have advantages and disadvantages too.
Same question for Brian Treese.
Thanks, David. I'm not opposed to having a larger council if voters approve that. I think a larger council probably leads to longer city council meetings, and I don't think anybody wants that. In a strong city manager form of government, you need a strong mayor and a strong city council to hold that individual accountable. So rather than having more city council members, I think our current city council members need more resources to get the information they need to better respond to constituents, to better analyze budget data, and to get some of the answers. That was one of the reasons I asked for an amendment to allow the internal auditor to report directly to city council, so that the council would have a professional in the city manager's office that could really address some of the financial, let's say irregularities, but certainly some of the financial questions that we were asking again and again and again and not getting an answer for.
I want to go, and some of you have answered this, but If it were up to you and just you, would you enlarge the city council, Carl Scala? Don't wait for the census, don't wait for what the city says, would you?
No, but I'm open to the possibility of increasing the city council to 9 members. I think it's important not to go too far with this. We don't want to get to the 28 level that St. Louis has, or the 45 that Chicago has. We're not at that point in our evolution here. But generally speaking, I think this city council has served us pretty well. I echo the sentiment that what we need is support. We need some staff resources that can dig into some of these issues rather than just the representation.
Chris Kelly, same question to you. It's just up to you. Would you enlarge the city council if it were just your choice?
It's hypothetical because it's a charter amendment, and it's something that the citizens ought to, the citizens ought to just decide. I don't have a strong opinion on it. As I say, there's some advantages you get from a 9-member council. There's some, and you can get there different ways, and there's advantages you get from the current size of the council. So I don't have a strong view of whether we should change it or not.
And Brian Treese, you said that if we enlarged it, it would make the council meetings longer, so is that a no?
I'm a no. I mean, that's not the first charter amendment that I would pursue in the whole scheme of things.
So another question sort of related to this. We talk about enlarging the city council. Somebody asked before the event started tonight, we don't have a challenger in the 2 wards that are up for re-election. Why? So my question is, why do you think there are no challengers for the 2 ward council positions up for election this time? Chris Kelly, you first, please, on this one.
People like Carl. It's hard to understand why, but I'm just teasing. I like him a lot. Maybe they thought the mayor and I would give them all the excitement they needed in a mayor's race. I don't know why people didn't choose to run. It is certainly an indication of satisfaction. I'll tell you this. I ran as a state representative, sometimes opposed and sometimes unopposed. And I don't like to say it because I don't want to get future opposition. But I think I was a better state representative every time I had opposition. You're more in touch. You're more connected to the community. You're out there going door to door. You're more focused on getting the issues right. The system, the concept is a good one. And I enjoyed and could relax when I didn't have an opponent, but I was probably better when I did.
Brian Treese, why do you think there are this isn't your race, you actually have an opponent, but the other 2 council persons do not?
Some days I wonder why anyone would want this job. Look, and Betsy Peters was unopposed too, just last April, and 3rd and 4th Ward as well. Look, I think competition is good for our democracy. It certainly hones my skill set, and part of my decision on whether to run for re-election was I honestly think voters need to hold me accountable. And if I'm doing a good job, they'll re-elect me. And if I'm not, I need that feedback.
Carl Scala, are you surprised you don't have opposition, and why do you think you don't?
I'm astounded. If I would have bet on this election, I would have lost a lot of money. I mean, for the fact of not having an opponent, I assumed that I was going to have an opponent. I always acted as if I would. I intend to continue to act as if I do, with some, there are some caveats. I mean, obviously, I've scaled back. I don't have to raise quite as much money and so on. I intend to go door to door. I intend to go to all of the forums to answer questions that people have. I think this is a part of being responsive when you're as an elected official. I also agree with Chris that it makes you a better opponent when you have an opponent. I don't think there's any question about that. But for a myriad of reasons, and not the least of which, I mean, we get a stipend, and I appreciate it very much. I mean, I spend probably twice the amount of stipend just going for the meetings in terms of professional development. But it certainly is something. It was almost embarrassing to go to national meetings at one point or another and talk to people that we're a town of $450 million budget, and we don't pay our city council people anything. I mean, it was kind of a strange thing. We don't pay our city representatives a lot, but it certainly helps. We appreciate it, and I think it's a good idea. We can have that argument, that continuing argument as to whether or not that ought to be increased or not. I mean, that everybody has opinions about that as well. But nonetheless, yes, I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised, I might add, because it's a tremendous amount of work to mount a campaign.
Anybody want to make any further comment on this question at the panel here? Let's move on to another one then, related semi to this, and I'll throw this one out, and we'll start with Brian Treese. How much do you anticipate it's going to cost to run your campaign for mayor this year?
Whatever it takes. I don't know, look, Skip Walter and I each spent over $90,000 3 years ago to run a modern, sophisticated campaign. I hope it doesn't take that much, but I do want to communicate with voters and in every medium possible, and hopefully I see the amount of money raised being a gauge of how much support that's out there.
Carl Scala, I don't know if this is appropriate for you or not, because you don't have a
I'm
person.
always willing to answer questions, whether they're appropriate or not. I think the history of running for office in this town, obviously the last election, the mayor mentioned that it cost $90,000 apparently for that election. Early on, it used to be $2,000 or $3,000 for some of these ward positions. The last 2 or 3 elections that I've had, it's been in the neighborhood of anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 just for a ward position. So I assume that it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 for this race for the mayor's, and it may be more. I don't know. It's just a guess. But there is a lot of responsibility. There is a lot of public input here. There's a lot of public participation. And I think that's quite right. It should take as much as it should take. It's an important job. These are important jobs.
Chris Kelly, your thought. You've run many campaigns. You've seen campaign costs over the years. What do you think is going to be the cost of the running for mayor?
The amount of money spent, not just on these races, but on races in general, is a public scandal. And I have for years offered my opponent the opportunity to limit the cost of the race to any number, let's say $40,000, $50,000. And I make that offer tonight. If Brian wants to do it, let's make a limit of $40,000, and neither of us spend more than that. And let's also limit the amount of contributions. There is no reason why anybody needs a $10,000 contribution in a mayor's race. I would like to, A, limit the total amount voluntarily. We don't need the government to tell us to do this. We can do it as gentlemen. Limit the total amount and limit the size of the contributions to say, well, I don't care, whatever, $1,000. Something we would make national news by voluntarily limiting both the top dollar and the individual contributions. And as I say, we don't need the government to tell us to do it. I'm willing to do it tonight. I wonder if Brian is.
Well, then I've got to give a follow-up answer then. Brian Treese, do you have a reaction to Chris Kelly's challenge there?
I'm going to follow the law that voters passed in November, and that is to not have campaign finance limits on local elections. I mean, it's pretty rich for Chris to say this when he set the record for the largest, most expensive state rep race in Boone County. Your last race with Ed Robb was over $300,000 on both sides.
He outspent me 3-2. I offered him the same deal. He wouldn't take it. The Republican Party gave him 80% of his money. I raised the rest from the people in this town, and I won. If we don't have a limit, I am capable of doing it. And I think both the effort is wasted and the amount of money is scandalous and ultimately corrupt. So your answer is no.
Brian Treese.
I'm going to follow the law.
So that means no.
The answer is no, Chris.
Okay.
Carl Scala, I hate to ignore you, but I'm not quite sure.
Just let me add it, just a comment, and that is the idea of, I mean, I don't have any problem with, I've never seen $1,000 contribution to any campaign that I've ever raised. So this is not, to me, it's not an issue. But I tend to think that obviously contributions are a function of the amount of support and the loyalty that people have for voting for you, in addition to the amount of money that they can provide. I don't have a dog in this fight.
Right. Moving on, let's go back to one of the questions from the Board of Realtors as they got together and came up with these questions from one of their Government Affairs Committee came up with this question. And we'll start with I think, as I try to take turns with this, I think we'll start with Carl Scala on this one. What type of characteristics are you looking for in the next city manager?
Well, by the way, let me provide the caveat that I've served on the Chamber of Commerce and the Government Affairs Committee since 2004. Obviously, there's a whole panoply of recommendations that we got from Human Resources. It's the usual, and I recently got from Nick some suggestions as to what the Chamber would like to see. And you would recognize all of these traits, if you will, finance and my big issue, and one of the ones that I made this pitch to the Government Affairs Committee at the Chamber, was I think one of the problems that we had, one of the large problems that we had in our former city manager, I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but when he got to this town, he realized that there was tremendous media scrutiny in this town. This is one of the recommendations that came from the Chamber of Commerce. You need someone who has robust credentials and a means of communicating with the press and the public. I think that was a limiting factor, and there were some other issues and so on. But that certainly is probably on top of my list for how the next city manager will be recruited. He has to have these robust credentials and the ability to interact directly with the press and the public. I mean, there's lots of other things about finance and morale in the city staff and so on, and certainly information exchange and the relationships between the city and the other government entities, the school district and the county and so on. But top of my list is this ability to deal with our robust press in this town.
Chris Kelly, same question. What would you, I'll restate it, what type of characteristics are you looking for in the city manager?
Carl's right about the press in Columbia. In fact, we've seen examples over the years of public officials who were good and not good at that. All the managers this is a tremendous job for a city manager. All the managers who apply will be able to do the budget. The city of Columbia is financially well managed. It's an honest government. It's got very competent, very ethical staff. We need a manager who will also consider the human aspect of Columbia. We have a big problem right now. One of the most important jobs of the new manager will be to hire the new chief. And that is something that should play a vital role, that the person have the intellectual openness to consider candidates who will try to solve the problems that we face in policing in Columbia, Missouri right now. Our managers have been, over the years, disconcertingly similar in terms of race and gender. We ought to I'm not saying we should hire somebody because they are not white and male, but we ought to at least openly consider and make an affirmative effort to consider candidates who are both non-white and non-male.
Brian, trace the question, what type of characteristics are you looking for in the city manager?
You know, I think personally speaking, obviously you want someone that has the operations expertise and the management expertise to really manage a city that's expected to double in the next 30 years and to really have a good grasp of the infrastructure investments, some of those generational investments that voters have approved and have yet to approve as we move forward. I think the other thing for me is probably a duty of candor, someone that delivers the bad news with the same enthusiasm that they deliver good news to council and to the community. As Carl said, you know, we have a very engaged citizenry here, and we have a very robust media market. And being able to balance those two issues. So for me, transparency is going to be a top priority in terms of how you represent the city, how you project the city's finances and access to public records. And you know, to Chris's point, this is a great opportunity for the next city manager. Columbia's a great community, not just in Missouri, but in the entire country. And it should be a destination for either a deputy city manager of a larger city or a city manager of an equal or similar sized university community that wants to take themselves and our city to the next level. I may cheat on my seconds here or come back to this. The other thing that the council has done and will soon announce is the process by which we're going to select that person. I think the recruitment firm that we're about to pick is not only going to interview council, the council will identify key stakeholders like the realtors to provide their input on what attributes, what values, what vision you expect the next city manager to have, and take that input as we begin to recruit the potential candidates. And then as we, as council, select those finalists and interview those finalists, how do we take the top 3, the top 5, and debut them, if you will, to those same stakeholders and in our community to really get the feedback of does she match the values and attributes that you gave us on the front end?
I want to follow up on that and ask a question, and Carl Scala, you're first on this. How is the job that John Glasscock is doing as interim city manager put an urgency or non-urgency to finding someone that would be the permanent city manager?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I've known John for many, many years. I got started in this business in neighborhood association kinds of activity about 1999, and I've known John since the early 2000s, and he's come a long way since being a public works director, additional responsibilities and so on. I think he's just what the doctor ordered in the context of some of the recent council decisions to make a search for another city manager. On the other hand, and I think folks in City Hall are whistling a much happier tune in terms of morale than they were whistling before. At least that's my impression of what's going on. So he's a real nuts and bolts kind of guy. He plows the snow, and frankly, I think I got less complaints about snow this time than I generally do. And I saw the snow plows coming down the street 2 or 3 times. So he does what he says he's going to do. On the other hand, there is this thing about some urgency to get a city manager. He wants to create some changes that are structural changes, but he also wants to defer to the new city manager to allow him the opportunity to have a management style and perhaps the ability to determine his police chief with public input and so on. The only thing that bothers me about dragging this process out too long, and I don't know what too long is, I mean beyond 6 months maybe is too long, but the point is, the city does not sit still. We have lots of work to do. There are lots of services that we need to provide our citizens. And some of this is kind of on hold because you have to defer to the new city manager in order to have him have an opportunity to engage in his management style.
Chris Kelly, same question about urgency to move forward with a permanent city manager selection as you evaluate the job John Glasscock is doing.
To John. He's done 2 things exquisitely. 1, he dealt with the police chief situation seamlessly. 2nd, he has dedicated himself to smoothing the path for the new manager. That shows a tremendous amount of personal commitment to getting his job done right. I don't know if I did A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, but whatever, either C or 3, he does know the nuts and bolts, and he's doing a good job with the nuts and bolts. Carl's absolutely correct about that. He is a very good interim city manager. He has no intention of becoming the long-term permanent city manager. And you got to really respect a guy who thinks my job is to make this work right for my successor. That says something very good about him.
Ryan Treese, the same question.
Sure. John Glasscock is a strong leader with high expectations. And, his presence, his steady leadership in the city manager's office really gives the council the luxury of time. We're not rushed to make a decision. We are going to take a thoughtful process that has public input and community input both on the front end and the back end, knowing that at the end of the day, most people and constituents in Columbia don't know or care who their city manager is, but they do want to know that their electricity works, that their streets get plowed, that their trash gets picked up. And John has done that his entire professional career for the city of Columbia. That's a good thing. I think the other thing that he's done is he's been effective at righting the ship. both in terms of morale, setting high expectations for employees, and he has the benefit of not seeking the job permanently, and therefore, while he has to please council, he doesn't really have to please council, and he certainly doesn't have to please his department directors, and that gives him a certain amount of freedom that allows him to make good decisions that are in the best interest of the city.
Let me ask two more questions, and then we'll go to the audience for questions. I want to ask the two more questions that the Government Affairs Committee came up with, and we'll start with Chris Kelly on this one. This has to do with the extension of the Henderson Branch sewer line. It's a dual question. Should that happen, and you're going to answer yes or no, I hope you'll say why or why not. And related to that is, what is your reaction to those who would say this was promised, why hasn't it happened already? It has to do with fulfilling promises that were connected with a ballot issue.
There are reasonable arguments to both do and not do Henderson Branch. However, and to do it, you need significant participation from the community where the new sewer would go in. There is no question about the fact that the money is present to do Henderson Branch and to meet significant central city housing rehabilitation and sewer rehabilitation, which is already necessary. The one overriding characteristic of the Henderson Branch project, and the reason that I am a yes, is because the city of Columbia gave its word. Now, some people will argue that we didn't technically say we would do this instead of anything else. That's all true. But when the city went out to the voters with that, they said, these are the projects we'll do. And if the city of Columbia and the leadership does not keep its word, the citizens do not have confidence. I am a huge advocate of the park sales tax. Right now, the lack of trust in the leadership of the city of Columbia is such that I'm not sure we'll have the confidence to renew the park sales tax. Trust is the single most important thing that a government official can have, and the city of Columbia, over not just Henderson Branch, but over Henderson Branch as one thing, has lost trust in significantly and important parts of this community. That's the driver on that question.
Same question to Brian Treese.
Well, to be clear, voters approved $2.6 million to extend city sewer services outside the city limits. I voted to go to bid, and when those bids came back, the cost was $4.4 million. I voted against that project twice, and here's why. For the very reason that Chris noted, there is no participation by the community that benefits from that project. The only person that would benefit from the taxpayer spending $4.4 million in the county would pay $2,700 to connect to the city's asset and remain a customer of the Boone County Regional Sewer District, while the rest of the city ratepayers continue to pay the cost for that $4.4 million extension. I'm not about to take $2 million out of city infrastructure funds when Pam Cooper is still waiting for her sewer to be repaired in her backyard for the last 10 years. Or Ken Jacob, who was annexed in on St. Charles Road, waiting for his to get a sewer, and he's still waiting for it. We need to take care of what we have before we bite off more than we can chew. And that's exactly what that vote represents. You know, for me, when we talk about annexations, I think there needs to be, clearly the land needs to be contiguous to the city limits. It was not until the very end. I think there needs to be some type of cost-benefit analysis. You know, in addition to extending sewer services in that area proposed to be annexed, we have to extend fire protection and public safety and street lights and hydrants and streets and sidewalks and all of the amenities, all of the services that the city provides currently, we have to extend to that area proposed to be annexed. And we have to make sure it can pay for itself. And I think there needs to be some owner participation with the benefit of connecting to the legacy system that all of you have paid for.
Carl Scala?
Well, obviously I tend to agree with the mayor on this one. I cast the deciding vote on Henderson Branch. And I did so primarily because we intend to keep our promises to the public. When the public votes, this early on, this is a $2.3 million project, it became a $2.6 million project, and then when somebody stuck a shovel in the ground, it became a $4.4 million project. And if we would have had some support in these negotiations from the private sector in terms of making up the difference, I submit even if we would have had what it cost Mr. Potterfield to correct his situation for sewage, that is, I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $600,000, Mr. Bechtold to the tune of maybe $50,000 or $100,000. If we would have had those funds, this would have passed easily, I think. You have to be mindful of the amount of cost that infrastructure is going to cost the city over time to fill in these gaps. And I know that you folks in particular are critically interested in opening that side of the city up. It's going to be hugely expensive because we have all of these bridges to create over Perchy Creek and so on. But my impression of this whole thing is this could have been solved, this could have been settled pretty reasonably if there would have been negotiations in good faith. And my sources tell me that never happened, because really what happened was some of the folks that were negotiating simply did not want to set any kind of precedent for establishing the private sector to pay some sort of an exaction for city infrastructure beyond the urban service area. Now, urban service area is another area that we need to discuss quite a bit, and I think it's a vital part of what our comprehensive plan is, and I think that's the discussion that we need to have.
Let's do a quick follow-up. I think, Chris Kelly, you said that the city does have the money to do the Henderson project and to do the central city sewer projects that are
That's
needed?
correct.
Would you explain more?
If you take the total amount of the bond issue, the $4.6 million was available in the bond issue money when the council voted no. Look, there's a couple of other important issues here. One is the environmental aspect of not doing it. Henderson Branch flows into Percy Creek. Our entire watershed is Percy Creek watershed, except for tiny, tiny little pieces. The entire city of Columbia is in the Percy Creek, Kingston Creek watershed. Putting sewage into that system without treating it is a really bad idea. For both the keeping the word and for the environmental concerns. I spent a lot of time on infrastructure, and if you don't fix sewers now, they get more expensive and the pollution problem gets worse. The time to fix it is now. Should there be local participation? You bet. And what do you know about me? You know that I made the deal on many, many big, important bills in Jefferson City. And I'll tell you what, if I go out to Midway and talk about this, we will get local participation and we will get the job done. The fact that the city, A, didn't keep its word, and B, couldn't negotiate successfully with those folks indicate a need for a change.
Brian Treese, the same response or the same follow-up?
Look, this is a zero-sum game. You can't tell me that you can take $2 million out of existing sewer projects and spend it outside the city limits, and Pam Cooper's project won't go down the food chain. City taxpayers should not. Well, I've created the mayor's climate action committee. I want to protect the environment, but city taxpayers shouldn't pay for a problem out in the county when there's a private landowner that may be contributing to that problem. That's not our taxpayers' responsibility. I won't apologize for protecting city taxpayers and ratepayers on this issue.
Carl Scala?
I think it's important to note that there is a responsibility for sewage systems, even whether it's the private sector or in the county, if you will. It's not a matter of dumping sewage into Perchy Creek. This is a matter of solving the sewage problem that you have that you're generating. Now, we don't have, and I think I made this point when I was agonizing over this decision about Henderson Branch, that the city simply does not have the amount of money to solve it. And these environmental issues are important. There's no question about it. If we can retire some of these sewage lagoons, that's what we ought to do. We simply don't have the kind of capacity and the money to solve regional sewer issues. I mean, we have to focus on, and the mayor suggested this, we have to focus on some of these people who have been waiting in line for 7 or 10 years with sewage backups here. It's not quite right to say that there's plenty of money to go around, we can solve all these problems. We have to pick and choose, unfortunately, and there is some responsibility for cleaning up your own mess.
I will give anybody 30 seconds, any or all. Any more comments on this one? I'll go to one more question, and then folks, get your questions ready. We're still going to have about 40 minutes left for questions from the floor. Here is another question from the Government Affairs Committee. Presiding Commissioner Dan Atwell of Boone County recently mentioned the idea of merging the Boone County Sheriff's Department and the Columbia Police Department. Your thoughts on the idea of merging those two departments, and we'll start with Brian Treese.
Well, I don't think we need a full-blown merger to encourage more cooperation. In fact, that cooperation happens every day at the officer level. We have detectives that are sharing information between the city and the county and MUPD. We have joint tactical. I mean, the MU football game is a perfect example of where you see Homeland Security, FBI, MUPD, CPD, and the Boone County Sheriff's Department working together. Where there can be more collaboration is at the management level and at the command staff level. Hopefully that has changed. The last time I talked to Sheriff Carey when school started, it had been years since he had spoken to the city's police chief. I led the way to encourage a memorandum of understanding, a collaborative policing strategy between the Columbia Police Department and MUPD that would give MUPD primary jurisdiction over Greektown. They have their own system of community policing that involves, having a liaison of the MU Police Department with every fraternity and sorority. They should do that. They do that better than we do. And if there are areas between the County Sheriff's Department and CPD that they do better, we should visit about that to make sure that we're making wise use of precious resources, that public safety is communicating with each other, and that our command staff is working together.
Carl Scott.
Yeah, there are some trends in certain jurisdictions of collapsing or participating in a regional effort for lots of issues. And that, I mean, some of them go as far as a rather radical idea about a regional tax base. That's even a step beyond just collapsing the police department. Generally, I'm not in favor of this idea. I first heard about it when the presiding commissioner offered his comments at the appreciation breakfast, and I was at the Government Affairs Committee meeting at the Chamber when he made his presentation to the Government Affairs Committee. And there was a very lively debate at the Government Affairs Committee as to whether or not this was a good idea or not. And I think the proof is in the pudding. His request was, well, we ought to just sit down and talk about it. I have no objection to sitting down and talking about it. I'm not sure where these discussions will go, and I'm not terribly optimistic about whether or not we can successfully do this. I'm perfectly willing to talk about it, but generally speaking, at this point, I'm not one of those in favor of this proposal.
Chris Kelly.
The health department is an example of seamless cooperation between the county of Boone and the city of Columbia. 911 is an example of seamless cooperation between a number of local agencies. Now, I'm using these two examples only as examples, okay? So I don't want to read that Chris advocates these particular combinations, but both the sheriff's office and the city police have a domestic violence unit. They both have property crimes units. They both have street crime. They have different kinds of police units, okay? I would take a couple of those and talk about, as Carl says, sit down and talk about, can we make the city primarily responsible for the domestic violence unit, for example. Something I know about because when I was a judge, I did domestic violence dockets twice a week for 7 years. So I began to get some sense of that, the nature of the people in that. I think they would cooperate well. You could have a single unit. The cross-intellectual pollination would probably be helpful. You could do the same thing. Whenever governments do this, they tend to save money on management costs. Of course, the big area of saving that you could do by doing these smaller things is, what if you started doing road and bridge, huh? You could save big bucks. Cooperation in local government is essential. One of the reasons it's a problem is because the other local governments do not have confidence and do not have trust in the government of the city of Columbia right now. The county, the fire district, and the school district all have bad relationships with the management of the city of Columbia, and it comes home to roost in ways like this that cost the taxpayers money.
Does the question become less a crucial one now that Mike Mathis and Ken Burton are gone? And would this be an opportunity to...
Yes, Camille?
I'm going to start with Brian Treese and go across. Everybody gets this question. And does this issue take on, I guess, less urgency because those two persons are gone, which may be, if you agree with Chris Kelly on what he just ended up saying about relationships between other government agencies and the city, if you believe that. And the other part is, if it is worth talking about, is it worth talking about prior to hiring somebody to be a police chief? Brian Treese, it's kind of a two-pronged question.
Sure, thanks. Look, I think the new year probably brings the opportunity for fresh starts and new beginnings, and I think having two vacancies in those two positions probably goes a long way to repair some of the relationships that we've had with the Fire Protection District and the County Commission. As well as the school district. But, you know, to be fair, I mean, our governments cooperate all the time. I work with county commissioners, and the county cooperates with the city on economic development projects, and as Chris said, the health department, our regional economic development authority, the Missouri Innovation Center, our road and bridge department and public works. We negotiate road improvements all the time where a city street enters the county jurisdiction and then back. So that is already occurring on a daily basis. I think on something as important as public safety, where it could always use more resources, you know, having opportunities to work together, just like our men and women on the front line do every day, and having that same level of trust and cooperation of the command staff is going to be important.
Same question to you, or questions to you, Carl Scala?
Yeah, let me just backtrack a bit. One of the issues, or one of the comments I remember Mr. Atwell making had to do with the fact that, you know, policing is policing, and it shouldn't make any difference whether it's in Ashland or Columbia. I submit it makes a big difference as to whether, or even whether it's on the campus. But I do think that it's hard to reconcile this whole idea about local city government, our governance here, losing trust with lots of folks. And at the same time providing an argument that we've had good governance over the last few years. I mean, it's hard to reconcile those two things. I would submit, and I don't want to read too much into this, but just the fact that there have been 3 unopposed elections for city council in the last 2 years suggests that people are not upset. Or if they are, they have other reasons. Maybe they think it's too much work to do this job for the amount of compensation. I don't know what those reasons are. But I think it's hard to reconcile those arguments. So this, I think, is an opportunity for a new city manager to provide some leadership in terms of the selection for folks. And this gets into that business about having a relationship with the press and the public, in terms of also having a relationship with other governmental entities, if you will, the county commission and the school district and so on. So I think that's the solution to this problem.
Chris Kelly, same question about the importance of doing this now, or would this be less urgent with the vacancies that exist and the change in leadership that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think the people not being there makes it a little easier, but the issues are institutional. They're not going to change a lot based on the personalities. Look, the county sued the city recently. The fire district is on the verge of suing the city. The school district is extremely unhappy with the leadership of the city because of the mayor's lobbying against a project that the school district and
Chris,
the city
that's
were
simply
working
not
together.
true.
Yes, it simply is true. The record is absolutely clear on it. These jurisdictions are good jurisdictions. If I am, you know this. You know that if I'm the mayor, the fire district is not going to be suing the city, because we're going to sit down and we're going to work out the issues. That's not happening today. It's happening at the worker bee level, I agree. It's not happening at the leadership level, and it should be happening.
We are asked to give 30 seconds for rebuttal. Anybody? Who wants to be first to ask a question of that microphone right in the middle aisle there? Oh, don't be shy.
Jim,
Mr. Mayor, Jim Meyer, Columbia Board of Realtors. In your opening comments, you mentioned the audit proposal, the public audit proposal, the performance audit. Mr. Kelly's raised the issue of trust in local government. I know we're missing and have been missing for some time our finance director, other key positions in the finance department, the interim city manager, and interim police chief. So does that create a new level of urgency for a performance audit, and where do you see this issue going from here?
I think so, and look, my sense of urgency for a performance audit has always been there, and I want to thank again the realtors for sending a letter requesting a performance audit. That precipitated my call before council. I've asked again and again for council to join me in that effort. And look, if this was a board of directors of a not-for-profit or a for-profit corporation, or if I was the president of a bank, and for the last 2 years we were lacking a city treasurer, missing an internal auditor for 9 months, and then the finance director resigned, all of those would be red flags for us. And look, I think it's essential that we have an outside independent look at the city's, not just the financial aspects, because a performance audit is different. It really looks at what are our policies, what are our investment policies, our practices, and makes recommendations based on ways to eliminate inefficiencies, ways to be, are we following the policy that council has set forward, and are we making the best use of those precious tax dollars? And so for me, I'm very much in favor of the performance audit, whether council asks for it or whether the citizens petition secures it. I think it's better that the council accept it and work with the state auditor's office now to really determine the scope and to get the results that we desire from that, rather than have a petition force an audit on us that takes us out of the equation and only gives us a bill at the end of the day.
We're going to let everybody answer this question. Carl Scott.
Yeah, I have kind of a modified approach to this, and I offered this before the city council, I think, when we were chatting about this idea. I'm not in favor of a full-blown state auditor's performance audit. I am in favor, however, of having an audit as independent as possible, some of which was the mayor's suggestion that this independent auditor that we're funding, who I understand has now been hired, and this particular person, it's a female who has performance audit experience, ought to tackle some of the issues where the largest problems, potential problems are. That is water and light. And we can start talking about issues about surplus reserve funds and whether they're too large or too small. This is a huge issue on a national level that is discussed all the time. I think that's the place to start. We ought to start incrementally. The idea of devoting $750,000, and as I understand it, that was for starters, for an audit across the board, to perhaps $1 million and tying the city up for 2 to 3 years also undercuts our ability to attract really talented folks for the city manager's position, because you wind up having somebody coming in to a maelstrom of performance audits. If we have a problem, we ought to take a look at it. And if it's necessary to get the state auditor involved, then that perhaps it is. But at this point, I think the way to approach this is to bring this independent auditor on board, take a look at some of the individual issues in water and light. That's the big dog in this town, and it's responsible for most of the budget. And it's also the interface where the public comes in contact with the government, and find out if there are problems. And if you want to, after that, if you want to proceed, if they find significant issues and so on, and illustrate those issues, then we can proceed from there. But to devote that much money and that much time at this point, I think it does not serve the public very well.
Chris Kelly.
I signed the petition. Having said that, it is far superior if the council arranges for a performance audit than if they do it by petition. For one thing, you get away from the adversarial nature of the petitioners. Second, performance audit is different than financial audit. All this talk about audits and finance gives rise in the taxpayer's mind that there is something wrong with the finances of the city of Columbia. That's not true. We have very good outside independent financial audits that demonstrate that for a long time, this city is both honest and financially responsible. When I say financially responsible, it's somewhat of a judgment call, isn't it? But I mean within what the definitions are of an auditor's responsibilities. The things that they measure do not point to either incompetence or corruption. Now, as to performance, yes, there are many things that the council could designate about areas that you could explore about how to do better with the operation of the City of Columbia.
Next question from the floor.
Good evening. My name is Joe Quinn. Been a Missourian most of my life. Columbia about the last year and a month, and very happy here. Small items. Carl, keep your pen down because a lot of this is for you.
I'm listening.
Quail and Whitegate.
Yeah.
Those two streets beg for center stripes. They absolutely beg for center striping. The skating rink at Quail and Whitegate. The ice rink is open already. It floods. It does not drain off. In the summer we wade. In the winter we skate. That needs, got to get an engineer out there and get that drained. In terms of office, I'm going to suggest 9 council areas, 9 council people. Do it 3 years each. You'll have to step them in, and mayor gets a 2-year term. He's the most person that's seen the most, but if it's working correctly, the council person in that ward, they need 3 years to get their job done. And they bring stuff to the mayor, and he takes it from there, but I don't believe he really has to do the studying that the council people do. Fence along I-70 on Clark. I don't want to look at it anymore. Please don't anybody tell me that's state or county or federal. This is the lowest form of government I've got. And I want somebody to get in there. I look at that thing 2 and 3 times a day. And it's ridiculous that it's been like that long. You want to know why there's no challengers to you guys? Come on, money. It's money. I could never afford to run against you. I couldn't begin to. I moved up here after 9 years in Lady Lake, Florida. It's right in the Villages, if you've heard of that, big retirement community. And we ran for $2,000. That was it. You're out of money, too bad. And I know that opening the charter is dangerous because you just don't open the parts you want open. When that baby gets open, it just sucks air in and ideas, and you gotta be careful. But
Sir, I appreciate your concerns.
more,
and if you have one more, we'll let you have one more.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
the black parents are afraid law enforcement will be killing their children. I wasn't sure what to say when I saw that. I don't know whether you were just trying to fire people up. You got my attention. But it's blacks killing blacks that get the big press. And that's what needs to be addressed.
In all fairness, you shouldn't blame the mayor for that.
I'm sorry.
That's Kelly's statement.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's Columbia's next mayor.
We welcome you to Columbia, and thank you for fitting in so quickly and understanding some of the concerns so quickly. I don't know what the question is here, other than I'll give each of you 60 seconds to respond, because I think what he brings up are those concerns that you as a mayor or as a council person have to handle, because it's a potpourri of issues that come up, some of them very specific to a neighborhood, some of them overall general concerns. Carl Scala, I see you're shaking your head, so you're familiar with this as a long-term council member.
I'm familiar with a lot of those issues, although I will say that this is this introduction from this gentleman was my introduction to some of these issues. I never really thought about the I-70 fence next to Clark Lane after we improved the sidewalks. I mean, that was part of it. these are legitimate complaints. I don't mean to cast aspersions here. But I would appreciate, regardless of how many council people there are, I would appreciate an email to the tune of some of these squeaky wheels that folks need to take a look at. A couple of these things is the first time I've heard about them. I had no idea. I had no idea, and I've been around for a while, about a skating rink on Quail Drive and different kinds of issues. So there's a lot to unpack here. With some of these complaints. I would submit that I think maybe if the other comment about having the mayor's term for 2 years rather than 4 years, I probably would lean more towards the 4 years than the 2 years if we did that. But you're right, to unpack the charter there are all kinds of changes that are potential here. Not that we don't need some of these housekeeping changes, and I would be open to considering that. I think the time to consider that, however, is within the next couple of years when we start deciding about redistricting and so on and so forth. That seems to be the opportune moment to do that. But I would invite you to send me some of those complaints that you have, and by Semper Fidelis, by the way. I saw your hat with me. but I would invite you to bring my attention to some of these issues, because we can't do anything about these issues if we don't know they exist.
Chris Kelly, I'll give you the, when I heard ice skating rink, I thought that's pretty cool. We won't know one of those for a while.
Maybe
Not
it's
this one.
a new city recreation. Get Gary in here. He'll turn that into a... the gentleman makes a point that I believe we all probably agree with. Emails or letters about specific problems with government always, or virtually always, attract the attention of public officials. If somebody in the city of Columbia has got a concern, write or call or show up and say something. People, politicians, Democrats, Republicans, city council people are, by their very nature, all over specific requests about specific problems. They're less likely to deal with things that are hard, big philosophical questions that are hard to resolve, huh? But if the curb is broken somewhere, tell somebody, and they'll see if they can fix it. And I think that's true almost across the board of all the people in public life that I have known. They like doing that kind of stuff.
Mayor, Brian Treese, your thoughts?
Completely agree, and thank you, Mr. Quinn, for being here tonight. To me, this is one of the best parts about local government, that anybody can come to a Monday night city council meeting and speak at the beginning or speak at the end about issues that affect them. Barbara Jefferson has done it, and is a great source of really informing my opinion. Or Kay Pingleton, who emailed about a development in her district. Or when I was talking to Steve Strawn in the back row, he said, "I've emailed you before," and I said, "Did I respond?" And he said, "Yes, you did." And I said, "That made me feel good, because I try to prioritize those constituent concerns, whether that's my street hasn't been plowed, or I've got a development happening, or there's just something going on in my neighborhood that needs to be addressed." And I think you will find that staff is very responsive, and your council members are very responsive. I don't know whether having more council members or longer terms makes that more or less. I do know that having some additional resources and just frankly sometimes more hours in the day to let us get back to you on some of these things, and hopefully our customer service is good, because I think that reflects well and improves confidence in city government.
If you want to ask a question, step to the microphone, and while you're stepping, I've got a question. We'll start with Chris Kelly on this one. If you were talking to a finalist for the city manager position, how would you describe the city's police department to her or him?
The Columbia City Police Department right now has some significant problems. It's got morale problems, it's got clearance rate problems, and it's got problems with its relationship to the African American community. But not just there. Out in the whitish neighborhoods, people still have I've heard the same kinds of problems expressed. We have to find a way to make all the citizens of Columbia comfortable. Think for a moment what it means. 3 times African American parents have said to me, "I have to tell my children to be way more careful than white parents have to tell their children." They are afraid. Now, maybe to say that is extreme in some people's minds, but the fear is there. It's real. And it's real because of the relationship. And the city has the obligation to fix that problem. It's real and we have to fix it.
Brian Tree, same question. If you were talking to a finalist for the city manager position, how would you describe the police department?
Yeah, our police department is broken. And the new chief or the interim chief is going to have to, one, unify that department and improve morale. That has been a long-standing problem over the last 7 to 10 years, and it's well documented in the paper and independent studies and in any conversation with any police officer or former police officer. Anyone can tell you, ask Sean, they know exactly when their retirement date is. And that's a terrible way to go through life, and it doesn't make you a very effective employee. The other thing that new police chief is going to have to do is get on top of the vehicle traffic stop data. The Attorney General's office say that we have a racial profiling problem, and there has to be some focused attention to that that balances the needs of the community with the laws that need to be enforced. And finally, our community policing initiative. We've spent the last 2 years meeting at Second Missionary Baptist Church about how to have a civil discussion, how to bridge the gap between police officers and the community they serve. Frankly, Chris's comments last week do nothing to improve that situation. I appreciate that he's acknowledged it, but the role of mayor is to project civility and predictability so that people don't insert their worst fears in that gap. Those conversations between police officers and the African American community, we have worked very hard to restore that confidence and that relationship and that communication in those efforts. I will tell you, when the former police chief got here, we had one chief, 5 captains, and what, Sean, 80 officers maybe. Under Ken Burton, we have a chief, 2 deputy chiefs, 3 assistant chiefs, 7 lieutenants. Okay, we now have more command staff per capita than any other city, and fewer officers and detectives per capita. If we can streamline that top-heavy management, we could afford 22 new police officers without raising taxes.
Carl Scala, same question.
I think the former police chief, and I have to be careful when I start talking about issues that deal with personnel here. That's not the city council's responsibility. That's the responsibility of the city manager, which makes it even more important to select the city manager that is cognizant of what has occurred here. We have some real issues. We had some real issues a few years ago when Mr. Burton came here, and we had pretty much a wild bunch that was having parties on top of the parking garage, on top of the police department. He did reorganize, to his credit, reorganize some of the command staff. I think he probably went too far, in my humble opinion, but nonetheless, that created lots of morale issues in the department. And by the way, as a caveat, my daughter is a police officer in Columbus, Ohio. So we've talked about a lot of these issues quite a bit. I'm glad that things are evolving. I'm glad that this has been kind of a cascade in terms of the city manager and the police chief. It's going to be an opportunity for the new city manager to consider all of this conversation that the public is having in terms of getting someone on board who understands what some of the issues are. I also want to highlight this whole idea about the racial issue, the racial component here, because there are some tangible things that are kind of on pause because of the city manager's appointment here. One of those is the $50,000 that was set aside in the last budget for hiring, if you will, some of the National League of Cities racial equity and leadership group to take a racial equity lens at some of at all of our ordinances. I'm looking forward for that to occur, and that's contingent, of course, upon our selection of a city manager.
I want to get to the audience member question, and I know we're getting short on time, but any further comments?
Did I get it? I feel kind of neglected here.
You got to answer first, but...
I did?
Yes, because
Well,
I
then-
wrote down your first words where we have a morale problem.
That's fine, then I'm all done.
There have been many times when I've lost track of who's answered, but tonight I'm really trying to stay on top of this. I think we have time at least for one more from the audience, so thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I would just like to know what actions each of you be willing to take to get, I'm gonna say, low-income people more involved in actually making it to public meetings, like the city council meetings? What actions? I hear a lot about Second Baptist Church. That's not the only place low-income people can meet. So what actions are you willing to take?
And this should start with Brian Treese as we change our lead answerer to each question.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks for your kind emails. I derive a lot of support from your words, and your testimony before council meetings are always spot on and kind of bring our discussion to a point in an important way. I think there's a couple ways that we can do this. One, I want to recruit a more talented and diverse pool of applicants to our boards and commissions, because a lot of the issues that get to council start at a board and commission level. And it's not just, I don't want to pigeonhole low-income people by just serving on Board of Health or low-income housing or those types of issues. That talent and diverse pool of candidates ought to permeate all of our boards and commissions. The other thing that we need to do is, I'm willing to take the city council meeting on the road, if you will. If we can find a place that is accessible, that the viewing audience can see it, that is, have the audio visual that everybody can hear, I would love to go have a city council meeting somewhere else. There's nothing that prevents us in the charter from doing that, but I do think that would have a better, I think it would yield a different result than would often be presented at a city council chamber. And you know better than I, although I've before I was mayor, it's hard to get up at that podium sometime and speak your mind or speak from the heart. That's one of the reasons I've with my wife's help, I've adopted this Bold Leadership Academy to take young black and brown girls into the council chambers, and we have a mock city council meeting so that they can envision themselves behind the dais, debating issues and talking about it. And while half the class is behind the dais, pretending to be or mirroring city council members, the other half is at the microphone speaking and advocating for an issue that they're passionate about. Because I want them to envision themselves, 5 years from now when they're out of college and someone says, you ought to run for school board, or there's an issue in their neighborhood that they're concerned about, and they say, you ought to go talk to city council. They can say, I've already done that. I can do that. You know what I mean?
Carl Scala, same question about low-income involvement.
I endorse that whole idea about taking the city council on the road. This has been a national conversation in lots of places, so a lot of it has become electronic. We had some success with this with regard to the strategic plan and the underserved areas that were identified, the 3, and then eventually expanded to 4. And some of this had to do with the conversation on community policing, where we actually had dinners and people could come within their own neighborhoods after we had a crew of people knocking on doors asking them what they needed. And what you found was that you have emergent leaders, people who don't typically show up at city council meetings. And I've been on both sides of the dais and realized it's difficult on both sides, but for different reasons. But some of these folks can't even get to the meetings. They just don't have the capacity or the opportunity to do that. We need to get to them. And with that kind of leadership, that's the kind of, one of the very good examples of that was in one of these meetings in the 3rd Ward, for example. We were talking about some of this particular underserved area around Indian Hills and so on. And what the effect of this was, what they really wanted was some pretty simple results. They wanted street lights, sidewalks, and public facilities, right? Street lights are cheap. Sidewalks a little bit more. Public facilities take some planning. But those are genuine grassroots kind of requests that those folks in those neighborhoods need. That's the kind of thing we ought to encourage more of, so that we hear from voices that we don't typically hear at city council meetings.
And Chris Kellen?
I'm trying to think of places. You could certainly go to the Arc. You might be able to go to Parkade Plaza. You could probably, you see where I'm thinking here. I can't think of all the places around town where you could take council meetings out of downtown. But those are 2 examples that jump to mind right away. I'm not sure that it works as well at Parkade as it would. But see, MAC may have some facilities. University may have facilities. School cafeteria. You could maybe do it. But, you know, Carl's a model about this. Carl's a model for two reasons. One is, and people don't realize how much council members do in this regard. He goes to national workshops on how to make your city more racially equitable. And he's a leader nationally in that. And I admire him for that. And he also is good at getting out in his ward and having meetings where people can come to him. And I think he'd be a model in those areas, those kinds of things for me.
Do you have a follow-up? Are you satisfied with the answers, or would you like to? You don't have to go back to the microphone. I can say it.
I thank you all for your input. I just really agree that, you know, it bothers me that when I go to these public meetings, that afterwards people come up to me and say, we need to see more of you here. And I'm just wondering why
You know
why
what?
is that?
We shouldn't let the technology drive us away from places. It doesn't matter if the technology isn't as good as it is in the council chamber. What matters is the interpersonal contact and relationships. So I wouldn't be put off by the fact that, well, their audiovisual is not so good.
I think we also have to be conscious of people who, you know, we start our meetings at 7 o'clock at night. You often sit there till after 11 to say your 3 minutes at the end of the meeting. You know, can we start the meeting earlier? How do we balance those who work a full day or may not have childcare or, you know, may not be able to take a 4-hour gap, you know, on a Monday night to come there? I am most gratified, though, of you know, just like Mr. Quinn came to us, we had a resident on Quail Drive come to us and said, the trees need to be trimmed, we need brighter street lights, and I'd like to see a bookmobile. And 2 weeks later, she came back and said, thank you. Parks and Rec was out there the next day, Public Works came and brightened the light, and they were seeing an improvement there. So, I mean, that type of immediate, you know, local government that's closest to you is the best.
And I'm sorry, I just want to say, my streets have not been plowed. And I do
What's your
have-
address, Barbara?
What's the
It's
street?
in Central
Okay.
Columbia.
Okay. What's your
North
street?
5th Street.
Fifth.
Yes.
Carl Scala, anything else to add to this?
No.
All right, Mike Martin, final question, and we will get very close to being out of time.
Mike
We
Martin.
picked up the microphone, so this
Yeah.
worries me. Start the clock on it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mike Martin, Columbia resident, 20 years now. Question, I'm a little surprised tonight that the meeting has taken a course of sort of being a referendum on city management, being that bad city management has particularly prompted Judge Kelly to get into the race. There are two people on the dais tonight who were cheerleaders of the current city manager over the years, who was in office, I think, since 2011, who has just left. And my question tonight is it fair to make this race, particularly the mayor's race, since you don't have an opponent, Councilman Scala, but to make the mayor's race a referendum on bad city management when the city manager just left and the current mayor is one of the major reasons that he left and took the police chief with him? That's my question. How fair, and are we going to see this referendum on bad city management driving this race again from Judge Kelly, who a few years ago, just 3 short years ago, as chairman of the Mayor's Infrastructure Commission, was applauding city management and talking about how great it was and how all the citizens who were concerned about infrastructure rate increases and complaining about lack of trust in the city and bad management were basically full of it. So are we going to see that kind of, is this going to play out? And should it? Is it fair to make that assumption? Should we wait for city management to change it?
This is a good final question from the audience. Carl Scala, it's your turn to go first.
Well, I don't know whether there should be a referendum on city management, given that the recent city manager has left. There's a myriad of reasons, some of which were in closed session, why our collective opinion of the city manager evolved over time. I was out of office for that period of time when the former city manager was selected, and I came to, I've been through 3 city managers now, I guess, and I came to know Mike very well, I thought, and initially he had some he had so there were some issues. Some of us did not favor the EEZ, for example, and some of the district-wide TIFs and all the rest of that. But then he kind of he redeemed himself with his efforts with respect to the strategic plan. And one of the issues that I brought back from one of these meetings had to do with social equity. It got to be part of the strategic plan, and I think Mike, to his credit, was genuine when it came to social equity and even some of the issues of racial equity. He got in some difficulty later, but the big problem later on really had to do with the delivery of information that was not forthcoming. And I think it goes back to that whole issue of the inability to deal with the press effectively and the public effectively. So that's kind of how this evolved in terms of city management. I don't, whether this race becomes one of those issues because that city manager time moves on. We have to conduct business, and we have to do it in the best way possible. I'm a little bit worried that everything is going to be put on pause until we can select a new city manager to give him the opportunity to demonstrate his managerial chops. But we'll try and do that as efficiently as possible. And if that's how this argument evolves, well, so be it.
Chris Kelly, same issue.
Thank you. Every mayor's race is a referendum on on management of the government. It ought to be. That's why we have elections. My concerns are directly about the operation of the mayor in the city of Columbia. I am extremely concerned about the relationship to the other local governments. The relationship with the school district, with the county, and with the fire district is poisonous. And those governments will all confirm that. It was absolutely wrong for the mayor to go to Jefferson City as the Teamster lobbyist and lobby against a plan that the city, that the school district, and the Chamber of Commerce were working on together to make transportation for school kids better in the city of Columbia. The situation with the fire protection district is highly inappropriate. We have areas of the city of Columbia where people are being double taxed for fire service, where there is no clear chain of fire command, where we have two fire departments with the legal responsibility to provide services, but no clear understanding of who's in charge. That's a problem. A city council or a place like this is a wonderful place for democracy. A fire is not a good place for democracy. And for many, many years, the fire district and the city had working relationships. They do not now, and they will if I am elected mayor.
Brian Treese.
Thanks for the question, Mike. I'll probably need to think on it some more. Whether it's right or wrong, it's probably the way it is. My first and only election 3 years ago was clearly a referendum on city management. I mean, I knocked on over 1,000 doors, and the most common complaint I got was fire the city manager, get rid of the police chief, or both. I hope that I've been a progressive change agent on those issues. And for me, it was probably an accumulation over the last 2 years of transparency issues and lawsuits in the community, policing stonewalling, and just the lack of responsiveness on financial questions and, inflated spending when it comes to, top tier staff and doubling the city manager's office budget. I think this is a rare opportunity for us to hire a new city manager that can really look at the best of what Columbia has and the best of city government and repair some of those broken relationships that existed long before I was mayor.
Just think if Ian Thomas had been here, it'd be 8 o'clock now. Or later. We've got closing statements right now, and we're going to start in the reverse order of what we did at the opening statements. So that means, Chris Kelly, we've allowed 2 minutes, if you want it, for closing statements.
Many of you have known me for 30 years. You know that I will be ethical, open, and committed to doing a good job. You know that I will work with anybody on any issue regardless of their philosophical perspective. You also know that I will stand up to special interests, whether they are financially or politically motivated. Columbia must continue to represent the broad rational center and to reject right and left extremism. We need, for our continued progress, the center of this community must hold, and more than anything else, that means keeping our word. That's why I'm running for mayor. Thank you.
Carl Scala, your closing comments?
Yeah, I hope I won't even take the amount of time I'm allotted, but I would be remiss if I didn't try and simplify why I'm running and what that's all about. I just want to leave you with a few highlights, and that is, over the course of the last 20 years or so, all the way from neighborhood association activity to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then the City Council and so on, has culminated in lots of the same themes over time. Most of them are about the infrastructure and public safety. That always rises to the top of folks' list. This year, I have kind of three items, and I want to highlight some of those, what I've been thinking about some of those issues, to invite the public conversation. It's going to be a scaled back campaign. Gratefully on my part, that's a tremendous amount of work to deal with the campaign. But those three issues are going to be equity, sustainability, and delivery. And what I mean by that is, in terms of equity, what I've been thinking about, that's social equity, racial equity, infrastructure equity, other city resources in terms of, and equity is far different than equality. It really has to do with people getting the tools they need according to their needs. Sustainability, big issues, particularly for this group: growth, annexation, public safety, neighborhood protections, fees and exemptions, utility costs, and perhaps even inclusionary zoning incentives. And then delivery. I take some pride in the fact that I've been doing this for a little while, 3 terms. And I think I've come to the conclusion that actions speak louder than words, even though I sometimes like to chat a little bit when it comes to city council meetings, maybe a bit too much. But there's all kinds of, I would invite you to take a look at my voting record and just to highlight a few things. And the environment and energy, yes, to establish Mayor's Climate Action Task Force, yes, to establish City Office of Sustainability, yes, on watershed management in Columbia's creeks, yes, on alternative fuel city vehicles, on development, yes, on a new unified zoning code, yes, on a comprehensive plan, yes, on Benton Stevens neighborhood overlay protections. Not on all, but one high-rise student apartment complex. I've voted on all of those except for one. And there are others. But just take a look at my voting record and make your decisions accordingly.
Brian Treese?
Thank you, David. And thanks again to the Realtors and for the audience participation at this forum. You know, 3 years ago, I stood here and promised to make our government and our economy work for everyone. That's why I'm committed to women and equity and diversity. I'm proud that since April 2016, we've voted to appoint a talented and diverse pool of 166 women to the city boards and commissions, including the first 2 women to ever serve on the Water and Light Advisory Board since the board was created in 1964. When I took office, the City of Columbia had a C- on the Human Rights Campaign's Municipal Equality Index. But I pushed for changes to our fair housing and non-discrimination ordinances that helped us earn a perfect score for the last 2 years in a row. Because it's important that our city reflects the community it serves. And now more than ever, in the current political reality, welcoming cities like Columbia are more important than ever. Because when we make Columbia a welcoming place to live and work, our economy responds enthusiastically. People want to move here. They want to send their kids to college here. They want to start businesses here. You know, in fact, Columbia is the only city, the only major metropolitan area in the state to grow jobs at a faster rate than the nation as a whole. Our payroll has increased 2% per year over the last 3 years compared to just 0.78% statewide. Our unemployment rate at 1.6% is the second lowest in the nation, second only to Ames, Iowa. And while that unemployment rate is down, our quit rate is up, meaning the number of people that are leaving their current positions to take a higher paying job. And that means more family supporting jobs and people who can afford to buy their first home or move up to a better home. I'm running for mayor to continue that progress by continuing to invest in our city, by reining in taxpayer giveaways to wealthy special interests, by making government open, honest, and transparent. And let's start the state performance audit. Because if we continue to strengthen and protect our neighborhoods and invest in infrastructure and public safety here at home, Columbia's best days are ahead.
I want to say, Pam, thank you. Brian, thank you. Thank you to the Board of Realtors for hosting this. I think it's a good event. Thank you to the audience who's been so attentive, and also for the participation and your hanging in there to listen through the whole last hour and a half. And again, a round of applause, please, for the three candidates. The exit doors there, so you can catch them before they leave if you want to talk to them. Thank you for being here, and have a good evening.